It was a quiet Thursday evening in downtown Atlanta, and Special Agent Darren Cole had just wrapped up a grueling 2-week undercover operation. Exhausted and still dressed in civilian clothes, he looked like any ordinary black man heading home after a long day. He drove his black SUV through the city's outskirts, windows slightly down, enjoying the rare breeze. His mind wandered to the hot shower and leftover lasagna waiting for him. But as he approached a stop sign near a suburban intersection, red and blue lights suddenly flared behind him. A sharp voice rang through the patrol car speaker. "Pull over. Hands where I can see them." Confused, Darren complied. He knew the drill. He'd trained officers like this one, but tonight he was on the receiving end. As he placed his hands visibly on the steering wheel, the officer stormed up to the driver's side with the swagger of someone too used to giving orders. "License and registration." "You were swerving," he barked, without a greeting or explanation. Darren calmly responded, "Sure thing, officer." But before he could reach for his wallet, the cop's hand was already near his holster. Slowly, the officer snapped, "No sudden moves." Darren's FBI training kicked in. He moved deliberately, slowly producing his credentials, first his license, then a sleek leather badge case. The officer snatched it, ready to escalate, until he opened it. His eyes froze. "FBI," he stammered. Darren looked him square in the eye and said, "Special Agent Cole, do you always stop drivers without probable cause?" The officer turned pale. The tone in his voice changed instantly. I didn't realize, but the damage was done. Darren had dealt with this too many times before. Profiling, disrespect, suspicion without cause. But this time it would be different. This wasn't going to be another incident brushed under the rug. Not when the agent he tried to intimidate held federal authority and a direct line to internal affairs. Officer Brad McAllister shifted uncomfortably on his feet, sweat forming at his brow despite the cool evening air. His hand, still resting near his holster, slowly dropped as the realization of who stood before him hit like a brick. Special Agent Darren Cole wasn't just any man. He was federal law enforcement with jurisdiction that outranked his. "I didn't mean any disrespect, Agent Cole," McAllister stammered, awkwardly handing back the ID and badge. Darren took it calmly, but didn't hide the disappointment in his gaze. "Then explain to me," he said, evenly, "why you initiated the stop, ordered me to show my hands, and approached with your weapon practically drawn." McAllister looked down, fumbling for words. "You fit the description of a suspect in the area." Darren tilted his head, unimpressed. "That's funny," he replied, "because I've been surveilled all day with 3 federal agents and body cams documenting every second. Want me to pull up the footage?" The cop blinked, stunned. He had assumed Darren was just another civilian. Instead, he'd stopped someone who had full access to surveillance, legal resources, and internal accountability departments. Darren stepped out of the vehicle, not in a threatening way, but with the calm presence of someone in full control. "Let me guess," he continued, "black man. Late 30s. Driving a nice car. That about sum it up." McAllister opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Around them, traffic had slowed, and a few passing drivers glanced over at the scene. Darren noticed, but kept his tone low. "I'm filing a formal complaint. And trust me, when someone from the Bureau does it, it's not paperwork, it's a process." The officer paled. Darren wasn't angry, he was deliberate. This wasn't just about a traffic stop gone wrong. It was about how authority is used and abused, and how men like McAllister rarely face the consequences until now. Darren returned to his vehicle without another word, his message delivered with precision. But what he didn't know yet was that this one stop would ripple far beyond that quiet street, and would expose a pattern the entire department had been trying to hide. 3 days after the incident, the formal complaint landed on the desk of Internal Affairs like a thunderclap. Darren Cole hadn't just filed a basic grievance. He submitted a full report, complete with timestamped body cam analysis, bureau surveillance, and even dashcam footage from nearby traffic cams. It was airtight, and when an FBI agent raises a red flag, especially one with Darren's record of service, people pay attention. The precinct buzzed with quiet panic. Officer Brad McAllister had returned to work, pretending nothing had happened. But whispers followed him like a shadow. The rookie officers avoided him. The veterans gave tight-lipped nods and kept walking. Brad knew something was coming. He just didn't expect it so soon. On Thursday morning, Chief Monroe summoned Brad into his office. The blinds were drawn and the mood was tense. Sitting beside the chief was an unexpected face, an agent from the FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility. Brad sat, trying to steady his voice. "Sir, if this is about the traffic stop, it is," Chief Monroe interrupted. "And Agent Cole's report paints a very different picture than the one you included in your own documentation. Care to explain that discrepancy?" Brad swallowed hard. His report had conveniently left out his aggressive approach, the way he reached for his gun, and the smug tone he'd used when asking Darren if the car was his. The FBI agent leaned forward. "Do you often stop vehicles based solely on suspicion, without verifying license plates or bolos first?" Brad stumbled. I saw a man matching a description. There was no active description that day," the agent snapped. "That was verified by dispatch logs. You lied in your report." It was more than a reprimand now. It was perjury, false documentation, and abuse of power, all under review. Brad felt the walls closing in. He tried to defend himself, claiming he feared for his safety, but the footage told a different story. There had been no resistance, no erratic driving, no threats. Just a black man in a suit behind the wheel of a late-model Mercedes. And Brad had treated him like a criminal from the first second. Meanwhile, Darren stayed out of the spotlight, but the wheels were turning. The incident had sparked conversations at the Bureau, particularly among agents of color who were tired of the dual identity they carried, defenders of the law by day, targets of bias when out of uniform. Darren received dozens of emails from colleagues, sharing their own experiences of being profiled or dismissed. He hadn't just filed a complaint, he'd lit a fuse. The story started to leak. A few journalists with close ties to federal law enforcement got wind of the report. Soon, headlines began to pop up. FBI agent profiled by local cop during routine stop, and when the badge isn't enough, black agent sheds light on systemic bias. Chief Monroe knew it wouldn't stop there. The department's image was under threat, and now they had to act fast, not just to manage optics, but to avoid a federal investigation. For Darren, this wasn't about vengeance. It was about accountability. He knew from his years in the field that not all officers were like McAllister, but it only took one unchecked ego, one assumption, one abuse of power to turn a badge into a weapon. And this time, the man on the receiving end wasn't powerless. He was armed with facts, law, and something far more dangerous to corrupt systems, visibility. Officer Brad McAllister sat in his car, parked outside the station, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. The walls of his once-inflated confidence were crumbling faster than he could patch them. His phone buzzed nonstop, messages from his union rep, cryptic texts from fellow officers, and now a direct summons from the city's oversight committee. He had become a liability. For years, Brad had operated with unchecked authority, bolstered by a department culture that subtly rewarded aggressive enforcement and rarely questioned his motives. But this time, he hadn't pulled over just another citizen. He'd picked the wrong target. Darren Cole's badge hadn't just protected him, it had exposed everything Brad had tried to hide behind his own. Inside the precinct, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Officers who once joked with Brad now avoided eye contact. The leadership had gone silent, distancing themselves like rats fleeing a sinking ship. His confidence turned to paranoia. He wondered how many of them had secretly filed complaints against him, how many were waiting for him to fall. Meanwhile, Darren returned to the Bureau, not as a victim, but as a catalyst. He was invited to speak at a departmental meeting about racial profiling and interagency cooperation, and what started as a procedural discussion quickly turned into a forum for truth. Black and brown agents stood up, one after another, sharing their stories of being stopped, questioned, or underestimated, even with credentials in hand. It was a damning reflection of a justice system that still struggled with its own bias. Darren's composure and credibility only strengthened his influence. A week after his report, an internal task force was created to investigate not only Brad's misconduct, but similar complaints swept under the rug. Darren didn't ask for that power, but he wasn't going to waste it. Brad, meanwhile, was ordered to turn in his service weapon and placed on administrative leave. The official reason was pending investigation, but everyone knew what that really meant. He was done. And as he left the station under the quiet gaze of his colleagues, it finally hit him. This wasn't just about a traffic stop. This was about a man who had worn his arrogance like armor and believed no one could hold him accountable, until the day someone did. Weeks passed, and the story that began with a routine traffic stop had now rippled far beyond the city limits. National media outlets picked it up after leaked footage showed the tense moment Officer Brad McAllister pulled over Darren Cole and demanded he step out of his vehicle, only to freeze when the FBI badge emerged from Darren's wallet. The video was brief but powerful. It became a symbol of how deeply prejudice still infected law enforcement, even when the person on the receiving end had taken an oath to uphold the same laws. But Darren hadn't let the moment define him by outrage alone. He followed it with action, working closely with community leaders, attending town hall meetings, and helping initiate department-wide training reforms. His quiet authority turned him into a voice people listened to, respected, and more importantly, trusted. Brad, meanwhile, faced a storm of accountability he never expected. Investigations revealed a troubling pattern. Dozens of complaints buried, body cam footage inconsistently filed, and racial profiling statistics that painted a damning picture. Stripped of his badge, he sat through hearings not as an enforcer of law, but as a man finally forced to face it. At the final disciplinary board meeting, Darren was invited to speak, not to condemn, but to confront. With steady calm, he described not just what happened to him, but what it symbolized for countless others who didn't wear badges but suffered silently. "This isn't about me," he said. "It's about who gets the benefit of the doubt in this country and who doesn't." In the end, Brad's career was over. But more importantly, his fall served as a wake-up call for an entire department, pushing them to reevaluate their culture, practices, and priorities. Darren's courage didn't just protect his dignity, it helped spark overdue change. And as he stood outside the precinct months later, watching new recruits walk in, young, diverse, and ready to serve differently, he knew this story wasn't about revenge. It was about redemption. Not for Brad, but for a system long overdue for it. Darren tucked his badge back into his jacket and walked away, not just as an agent, but as a man who turned injustice into impact.